The average tip in American restaurants is 18 to 22% of the bill. The average tip in French restaurants is 0. The average tip in Japanese restaurants is also 0, and trying to leave one can actually offend the server. Some American services, the high-end Manhattan steakhouses and Las Vegas resorts, expect tips of 25 to 30%. Some tipping situations in America now include picking up your own coffee at a counter, where the iPad asks for an 18, 22, or 25% tip before you have even touched what you ordered. If you have ever watched a European tourist sit down at an American diner, finish a meal, and try to walk out without leaving extra money on the table, only to be chased down by a server who explains that the tip was not included, you have already seen the second-order effect of this difference. American servers are paid through customer tips because American restaurants legally pay them less than minimum wage. European servers receive a full living wage from the restaurant itself. American food prices look cheaper on the menu because the labor cost has been moved off the bill and onto the customer. Here is the punchline up front. American tipping culture is not a tradition of generosity. It is a 160-year-old labor system that started with a constitutional loophole. It survived because three things stacked on top of each other over 150 years. A post-Civil War wage trick to keep paying freed workers nothing. A 1938 federal law that made the loophole permanent. And a restaurant industry so powerful it has blocked every attempt to change the system for the last 80 years. Take any one of those three away, and the American tipping system does not exist. Take all three away, which is essentially what Europe and Japan did, and you get the no-tipping culture that the rest of the world considers normal. And here is the wildest part of the whole story. The United States imported tipping from Europe in the 1800s. Then Europe abandoned tipping. America kept it, then expanded it, to the point where Americans now feel guilty if they do not tip the person handing them a pre-made sandwich. Hidden Systems explains the everyday things in homes and daily life that look like personal choices, but are actually labor systems designed decades before you were born. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Now let us walk back to where this started. In the 1850s and 1860s, wealthy Americans traveling through Europe encountered the practice of tipping aristocratic servants in private homes. Tipping in Europe at that time was a marker of class superiority. The wealthy gave small coins to lower-class workers as a sign of generosity from above. It was not how restaurants operated. It was not how regular employees were paid. It was a practice between rich travelers and household staff. American travelers brought the habit back across the Atlantic. They began tipping in American hotels and restaurants to signal that they had been to Europe and understood sophisticated culture. By the 1870s, tipping had spread from luxury establishments to ordinary dining rooms. Then came the Civil War, and the system found its real purpose. After slavery was abolished in 1865, the American railroad industry faced a labor problem. The Pullman Company specifically, which operated luxury sleeping cars on trains across the country, needed thousands of workers. They hired formerly enslaved black men as Pullman porters. The Pullman Company paid them almost nothing. Officially, they were employees. Practically, they were expected to earn their entire income from tips given by white passengers. The model worked perfectly for Pullman. The company sold luxury service. The customer paid for that service through tips. The worker provided the service. Pullman pocketed the difference between what passengers paid and what porters actually received. By the 1890s, this had become the standard model for service work involving black employees across America. That early head start created something the rest of the world did not have: an entire labor category where workers were not paid by their employer. They were paid by customers. The employer set the work hours, gave orders, controlled the conditions, and paid almost nothing in wages. Hotels copied the model. Restaurants copied the model. Barbershops copied the model. By the early 1900s, the entire American service industry had built itself around the idea that customers, not employers, would cover the labor cost. Then the Fair Labor Standards Act passed in 1938 and made it permanent. First cause, the 1938 tipped minimum wage loophole. The Fair Labor Standards Act established the federal minimum wage at 25 cents per hour in 1938. It was the first federal minimum wage law in American history. But the restaurant lobby fought hard for an exception. They wanted to keep paying servers less than minimum wage and let customer tips make up the difference. They won. The law created a separate category called the tipped minimum wage. Workers who regularly received tips could legally be paid less than the federal minimum. The employer was supposed to make up the difference if tips were not enough to reach minimum wage. In practice, that almost never happened, and enforcement was weak from the start. The federal tipped minimum wage today in 2026 is still $13 per hour. It has not been raised since 1991. The federal regular minimum wage is $25 per hour. The gap between them is a direct continuation of the 1938 loophole that allowed restaurants to pay less than minimum to workers who could be expected to earn the rest from tips. Many American states have raised their tipped minimum wage above the federal floor. California eliminated it entirely. New York raised it to $10.65 per hour. But more than 15 states still use the federal $13 per hour as the legal floor for tipped workers. In those states, a server who works a slow shift can legally take home less than minimum wage with no recourse. European countries took a different approach. Most European countries set a single minimum wage that applies to all workers regardless of tip status. France, Germany, Italy, and Spain all guarantee restaurant servers a full minimum wage from the employer. Tipping in those countries is genuinely optional because the worker has already been paid. A tip is a small bonus for exceptional service, not a wage substitute. Here, I have to admit something. When I started researching this video, I assumed Americans tipped more because of a stronger service ethic or a more generous culture. The data forced me to throw that assumption out completely. Americans do not tip 20% because they are generous. They tip 20% because the worker serving them is being paid $13 per hour and depends on the tip to survive. The tip is not a reward for good service. It is a wage that has been transferred from the employer to the customer. The behavior did not precede the system. The system created the behavior. Second cause, tipping expanded into places it had never existed. For most of American history, tipping was limited to restaurant servers, hotel staff, taxi drivers, and a few other specific service categories. Then in the 2010s and 2020s, something changed. Touchscreen payment systems became standard at coffee shops, sandwich shops, and quick service counters. Companies like Square and Toast built tipping prompts into their default checkout screens. The tip options that appeared automatically were 18, 20, or 25%. There was a no-tip option, but it required an extra tap, and the customer had to see it as a deliberate refusal. The result was that tipping spread to dozens of new service categories almost overnight. Coffee shops where you ordered at the counter, bakeries where you picked up a pre-made item, ice cream stores where you watched someone scoop a single scoop, self-checkout machines at airports that asked for tips on bottled water that was scanned by the customer themselves. This is called tip creep. Industry surveys from 2024 and 2025 found that approximately 70% of Americans feel pressure to tip in situations where they previously would not have. The pressure is not coming from the workers. It is coming from the payment system itself, which has been designed to ask for tips by default. The interesting part of tip creep is that the workers in many of these new tipped categories are paid full minimum wage by their employer. They are not on the tipped minimum wage. They do not legally need tips to reach minimum wage. The tipping prompt appears anyway because the payment software company designed it to appear, and the business that uses the software earns more revenue when customers tip than when they do not. Tip creep is the 1938 system migrating into new industries where the original economic logic no longer applies. The customer is being asked to subsidize wages that the employer is already legally required to pay. Third cause, every attempt to end tipping in America has failed. In 2015, the high-end restaurant group operated by Danny Meyer in New York City announced it would eliminate tipping at all 13 of its restaurants. Prices would go up to cover full wages for servers. Customers would no longer need to tip. The experiment was widely covered as the beginning of an American shift toward European-style service. It failed. By 2020, Meyer's restaurants reverted to traditional tipping. The reasons were complex, but consistent across many similar experiments tried at other restaurants in San Francisco, Seattle, and Chicago. American customers saw the higher menu prices, and felt the restaurant was more expensive than its tip-based competitors. They booked tables elsewhere. Servers earning a flat wage often took home less than they had under tipping. They left for restaurants that still offered tipping. The experiment could not survive the market pressure created by the surrounding tip-based ecosystem. Compare two restaurants for a second. An American restaurant menu lists a $28 entree. An equivalent French restaurant menu lists a €32 entree. The American customer pays the $28 plus a $5 to $7 tip, totaling $33 to $35. The French customer pays exactly €32. The total cost is similar. The visible cost is hidden in different places. One system shows the full price up front. The other shows a partial price and adds the rest at the end. Neither is wrong, but they are not interchangeable. The American system depends on customers being willing to do mental math at the end of every meal and tip according to social expectation. Once that expectation has been established for over 150 years, removing it from any single restaurant means that restaurants' prices suddenly look higher than every restaurant around it. The customer who would have paid the same total amount under either system feels they are being overcharged at the no-tip restaurant. The market punishes the restaurant trying to leave the system. The system continues. Stack those three causes: the 1865 Pullman labor model, the 1938 tipped minimum wage loophole, and the market lock-in that prevents any single restaurant from exiting the system, and you get the modern American tipping economy. A labor structure so widespread that the average American restaurant server earns 70 to 90% of their income from customer tips. So normalized that an iPad at a coffee counter asks for 25% on a $4 drink. So locked in that no major American city has successfully eliminated it despite multiple attempts. Now here is where it gets weird. The system keeps growing. The number of service categories that now expect tips has continued to expand into the 2020s. Furniture delivery, grocery delivery, auto repair, self-service car washes, hardware store curbside pickup. The boundary between tipped and non-tipped work has eroded almost completely. According to surveys from 2024 and 2025, Americans now report feeling tipping pressure in over 30 different service categories where their parents would have felt pressure in maybe 5. The high-end American restaurant now treats the tipping line on the receipt the way 18th century European aristocrats treated their personal staff. It is the architectural anchor of the customer relationship, and the economic cost of all this is real. Tipped workers in America experience higher rates of poverty, lower healthcare coverage, and more income variability than equivalent workers in countries with no-tip systems. The system was designed in 1865 to keep wages for black workers below subsistence level. The same legal structure today affects approximately 5 million American tipped workers, the majority of whom are women and people of color. There is one detail in the historical record that I think reveals the whole logic of how this happened. In 1916, William Rufus Scott published a book titled The Itching Palm, a book-length argument against tipping in America. Scott called tipping un-American because it created a class of citizens who served at the mercy of customers rather than working for a fair wage. His argument was widely supported. 6 American states actually passed anti-tipping laws between 1909 and 1919, attempting to ban the practice entirely. Washington, Mississippi, Arkansas, Iowa, South Carolina, and Tennessee made tipping illegal. All 6 states repealed their anti-tipping laws by 1926. The reason was consistent across every state. The restaurant industry simply refused to raise wages to make up for the lost tips. Servers earned less. Service quality dropped according to industry-published claims at the time. Customers began tipping anyway because they felt sorry for workers. The laws became unenforceable. Read that backwards. States did not repeal anti-tipping laws because customers wanted to tip. States repealed them because the restaurant industry refused to pay its workers. The tipping system did not survive because Americans loved it. It survived because the alternative would have required employers to pay higher wages, and the law was structured in a way that allowed them to refuse. The customers paying the tips were not making a free choice. They were filling a wage gap that the law had specifically permitted to exist. William Rufus Scott died in 1932, having spent 16 years of his life arguing that tipping was incompatible with American democratic values. He could not have imagined that nearly a century after his death, an automated payment screen at a self-checkout kiosk in an American airport would ask customers to tip 25% on a bottle of water that the customer had scanned and bagged themselves, with no human service worker visible anywhere in the transaction. His arguments against tipping in 1916 were ultimately ignored. His warning that tipping would expand uncontrollably has come true at a scale he never anticipated. Each tipping prompt that now appears on a coffee shop iPad is a direct descendant of the labor system he tried to dismantle. Have you ever felt the iPad guilt at a coffee counter when it asked for 25% on a $4 drink? Or had a moment in Europe where you tried to tip and the server looked confused? Tell me in the comments. What is the strangest place tipping has been asked of you recently? I want to know how far this has spread. I read every single one.